Hi and welcome to the Armourgeddon channel. My name's Stuart Garner and here we have our latest acquisition. This is a STUART M3A1 light tank. This particular vehicle was built in 1942, December 1942, and it was gifted to Brazil by the Americans to actually get them into the war. Apparently there was 300 that were actually given, and little known that the actual Brazilians did fight in Italy and up through into France. This particular one came into the UK a few years ago in a batch of about 14, was bought by a local collector local to us, and he decided to move it on to us. He had enough work on, so we've taken on the project and hopefully we'll get it restored in the next 4 months. Now these weigh in at about 15 tonnes. It would have had a 4-man crew, so you would have had your driver, your co-driver who also worked the machine gun on the front there, and 2 guys in the turret, so your commander and your gunner. The commander would have also acted as the loader. We'll show you around it in a little while, but when you see inside you will not believe you could have even got 4 people in here. They're so tight. To give you an example, if I need to get into the turret, I have to go in sort of feet first, arms in the air, and then sort of do a little wiggle to get into the seat. So I won't be demonstrating the inside of the vehicle. Somebody slightly smaller and a little bit thinner will be doing that for me. Of this actual particular model, the M3A1, there was only 4,621 produced. The main armament on this is a 37mm gun. In its day, it was plenty big enough to deal with the German armour, but it very quickly became obsolete. It was fitted to lots of other things, and these things were used all the way through the war, right up to 1945. But really and truly, they weren't matched for the German tanks much after 1942. You had plenty of firepower though. You had a machine gun in the front there, 30 cal machine gun, another one up in the turret, and then they would have had a 50 cal mounted on the back, or maybe a 30 cal mounted on the back, depending on which one they've decided. The early ones had machine guns also mounted in the sponsons here, and you can see on that side where it's been welded up. This one was never fitted here. But it must have been extremely difficult to not only keep the guns loaded and working, but even aim them, because the aiming of these 2 here was basically done by the driver. He had to turn the tank to face where they wanted it to fire. The power plant in this is a 7-cylinder radial engine. I don't know if you remember when we've been talking about the Shermans in the past. The Shermans had a 9-cylinder radial engine as one of their power plants. We actually hate the radial engine. I would much rather this had a nice diesel in it, but unfortunately it's got a radial, so we'll go with what we've got. Apparently these were very, very reliable engines and a lot more reliable than the Sherman's 9-cylinder. Obviously, with it being a radial engine, this particular one, it was a petrol engine. Not great for any kind of military vehicle, because if it takes any kind of hit, petrol obviously explodes quite easily, and that was one of its downfalls. Same with the Sherman, really, though. Take a direct hit on the fuel tank, goes up in flames very quickly. These did also have a diesel engine fitted, but not very reliable. As far as we've been made aware, what they used to have to do was basically tow start them in the morning, the diesel ones, tow start them in the morning, and then leave them running for the day, because they wouldn't start on the starter motor. These apparently were a lot better than that. These would start and were a quite reliable vehicle. They were just not armoured enough, and the crews had no room inside, which we'll show you in a little while. There was just no space for the crew to actually carry out their tasks inside. Here you can see the top armour thickness. This is about 38mm thick, so it looks quite thick, but nothing for a round to penetrate. Down a bit lower, they increased the armour to 44mm, which is still pretty poor. The only good thing down here is it is angled, so it was a little bit either harder for the round to penetrate or a bit more of a deflective shot. Here, when these are closed, these are very near flat, as you can see from the sides. So anything hitting that is going to go straight through. This was one of the problems the British found with it. They didn't like the fact that the armour was so thin, pretty well any German round would penetrate. Turret up here, you got the mantlet, that was the thickest piece. Can't remember the exact thickness, but 50-odd millimetres. And also on the front plate of there, a lot thicker, because that's the piece that is obviously going to take the rounds. Side armour, I think on the side here you go down to something like 25mm, so a lot thinner. So as you can imagine, unless you were front onto an enemy vehicle, you had virtually no protection on the side here. These were first deployed in action in 1941, towards the end of 1941, in the desert against the Germans. And it actually proved not too bad a tank. It was quite comparable to the German Panzer IIIs, who had roughly the same size gun, same thickness of armour. The only problem was the British tactics were not as good as the Germans. So the Germans ran rings around us really, and then once they started deploying their 88mm guns, basically these were easy meat. I think about 170 of these were deployed. Got mixed reviews from the British, but it filled a gap and it did a job. Weighing in at only 15 tons and the engine in the back producing about 220 horsepower, she was quite a nippy wagon. Did over 30 miles an hour. The problem with her was, couldn't carry enough fuel. I think she had enough fuel on her to do about 75 miles. And you can imagine, in the desert, large areas, weaving and ducking around, they'd find that wasn't enough fuel for them. They quite often ran out. And because of the speed of them, they quite often actually outstripped their supply line. So the wagons that were supplying the fuel got left behind, and so when these things ran out of fuel, they were easy meat. After 1943, they stopped using them as a main battle tank or a tank that would take on other tanks. They had a disaster with the Americans in the Kasserine Pass, which is North Africa. Lost a lot of them, and they were then relegated to reconnaissance and just support vehicles, really. Quite a few had the turrets also taken off, and they were used as what they called a kangaroo. So they would have troops inside and just take them to a bit like an armoured personnel carrier. As I mentioned earlier, this particular tank came from Brazil, and it's a little known fact that the Brazilians actually put an army into Italy and helped the Allies fight their way up through there. About 25,000 Brazilians went in. They had 300 of these. Don't know how many were actually in the theatre, but this one well could have been one that they took up through there. These particular vehicles, though, were obsolete by the end of the war and phased out by all armies except for a few South American ones. And I do believe there's even some of these still used in the Paraguayan forces, but mainly for training. But you can imagine that's, 75, 80 years later, so extremely obsolete by today's standards. So here we are at the back of the tank. Obviously this is where the engine goes. And in here we have the 7-cylinder radial, originally designed for aircraft, but fitted perfectly into this vehicle. So produced about 220 horsepower and pushed this tank along at over 30 miles an hour. Considering it's only 15 ton, not a bad speed. A little bit slimmer than me and a lot more agile. So you'll see exactly how horrendous it is inside one of these vehicles.
So I'm inside the driver's seat of the Stuart now, and as you can see, there is not much room at all. This is the driver's seat. You've got the co-driver's position just there. Then behind us to the right-hand side, you've got the commanders, and then right behind where I am is where the gunner would have sat. So just here, you've got all the dials that the driver would be needing, and here at the front, you've got the sticks, and as you can see with this one, it is very, very stiff. So there's a lot of work left to do in here, and you can see on the floor, not the best. It is quite rusty, but I think the floor is going to be one of the hardest jobs with all this. You've got the speedo just here to the right-hand side, which is a very awkward position for the driver to actually see. And just down here on the right-hand side, you've got the gear selector, which again is in a very awkward position to be able to use, especially if you're driving at 35 miles per hour. Inside of the co-driver's position, there is a lot less space, even compared when you're looking at the driver's position. As you can see, again, I am a lot more cramped in this position, and inside of here, you would have your 30 cal machine gun, and back here to the right-hand side is where the radio would have gone. Now, the really interesting bit about this is if this turret was just turned over to the left a little bit, the actual metalwork holding up the basket would be right behind my back. I mean, there is no way to actually get out of this thing, which does really make you worry. You know, if something ever did happen, you've not really got much of a chance. So behind me, you've got the turret basket, and as you can just see down here, you've got the hydraulic traverse pump, which powered the turret basket, so you could actually spin it around. As you can see, this one has been leaking, which is quite fortunate for us, because it means that the turret basket floor is actually being kept in relatively good condition. Here in the gunner's position, you've got the 37mm gun right here. And the good bit about it is it does actually go up and down, which is quite surprising for a vehicle that's been, well, in this sort of condition. The commander in here would also be the loader, so you would have some ammo either side of him, some down there, and well, really wherever I guess they could fit it. But look at how small this space is. You can't imagine how hard it would have been to actually reload this gun while trying to actually, command.
So there we have it. As we've shown you on the inside now, how horrendous and small it is in there, and the amount of work that we've got involved to put this back to running condition. We're hoping it's going to take us about 4 months, and we will be doing videos throughout the next few weeks just to keep you informed on how it's all going, and then hopefully in 4 months' time you'll see it in running, driving, looking pristine. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this latest instalment, and please like and subscribe our page, and we look forward to seeing you again.